We've been married 21 years, and the first 9 years of our marriage, our in-law issues were horrible. Horrible with a capital H. I went to therapy by myself, and I told my therapist everything that Casey was doing wrong, and she listened to me patiently. And then she says to me, but he's not here, so we can work on you.
The fact that Meygan started to change and she showed up very differently in the relationship. It goes to a mindset as well that you are a team with your spouse before you're a team with your parents.
The thing that's totally clear is that your highest value is the marriage. I've been looking forward with great anticipation to speaking with Meygan and Casey Caston. In fact, the two of you have this huge Instagram following. You are like salt of the earth, experts of the people. I'm going to let the two of you introduce yourselves with my expressed enthusiasm. I'm anticipating a really juicy conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having us. We're so excited to be here. So we're Casey and Meygan Caston. Yes, we are co-founders of Marriage365. And really, we started Marriage365 because it's what we needed in our own marriage. So, in a nutshell, we had a really, really hard first couple of years, almost to the point where we divorced. We were able to turn our marriage around. And as we were starting to heal our relationship, we were a little bit disappointed with the lack of resources there were available. Of course, this was before social media and this was before podcasts were a thing, but there really wasn't that many resources. And so we started creating them for our own marriage. And as we did that, our friends and family said, you need to get this out into the world. Every couple in the world needs to have these resources. Started with a Facebook page back in 2013. And now we reach, around 2 to 3 million people every week all over the world with all of our resources. And we love what we do.
I think dating was easy. And I just walked into marriage thinking, well, isn't it going to be the same thing? And then once we got married, all of the unprocessed trauma from our childhood, which actually kind of became a bonding agent during dating, like we saw each other's wounds. Once you're forced to live with somebody and work through life, all of that came out in an explosive energy with anger, rage, and just these missed expectations that we had over each other that just turned into screaming matches. And it was really, really ugly. I mean, it's just really, really hard to think back at that time about how we treated each other, which is why I think it's really funny that we would actually be people helping other marriages because we know how bad it was for us.
Okay, that's so fun because the two of you, it sounds like, had a lot of expressiveness and intensity in your challenging first years.
So it was interesting because I do feel like Casey Caston's the biggest benefactor of Marriage365 because even when we picked up our marriage after healing it, it took some time, and in a lot of ways we were growing and healing as we were teaching. And so it really felt like there wasn't a lot of shame. Like people can very much so approach the content we create because we're like, yeah, we were there too. Like we know what it's like and you don't have to be alone.
I actually think you can feel it when people are just saying it and not living it versus when the teachings come from lived experiences. And obviously I feel that with the two of you. But it's still a step to go from being benefactors of what you're creating to heal your own relationship, to then opening your hearts, opening your mouths, redirecting your purpose, and sharing it with others. I'd love to hear, were you both teachers before, or were you both like immediately clear, oh yes, let's share it with the world? What was that like? Because you enjoy your marriage, but you also use it as a gift for others. And that's a nuanced transition.
I was a teacher, but I for children, that's very different. Casey was a nonprofit fundraiser. We did nothing for marriage, interesting enough. But I will say this. Yes, we're both extroverts. We're both very used to being on stage, public speaking, things like that. But what actually got us kind of interested in it is we volunteered at our church. They had this like small group Bible study at night where you would like drop your kids off at the childcare and then we'd hear from a speaker, and it was very educational and we really loved it. And it really helped our marriage grow. And we met all these other amazing couples. And again, that thought of like, okay, our church has this, but what if people don't have these kinds of resources? I don't know, Casey, what you want to add to that, but I mean, it really is a funny thing of how we're the ones doing this, the least likely to succeed, the couple who failed and almost divorced at marriage. That's the irony.
Yeah, no, I think Meygan and I have been committed to authenticity when we show up for filming, for podcasts, for anything. And there has been times we've actually canceled film days because if Meygan and I are not aligned, we don't tolerate inauthenticity for our own platform. So we were like, all right, we got to figure Casey and Meygan out before we then present this gift, like you said, to other people.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that if you're committed to authenticity on your platforms and social media and filming, that is because being authentic with one another is one of the prerequisites to enjoying your marriage.
It's one of our core values. It really is. Each of us hold that. We look for that in friendships. We look for that through our parenting styles, and of course in our marriage. And I think that once we realized we were going the marriage route, I mean, I'm fortunate enough to where when my parents divorced when I was 12, they put me in therapy. So during those formative years of junior high and high school, I was going to therapy and I loved it and it helped. And I was like, this is really cool. I never thought I'd actually be kind of in that space as a career. I always wanted to be a teacher. But I do see how that really allowed me to understand the whole process, that there, like you said, it's not about the socks on the floor. It's not about, that it's money, right? There's so many deeper issues there underneath the surface. And a lot of that is the baggage that we bring into our relationship. A lot of it is unknown until it's exposed or it comes out. Or my therapist used to say, it's when you feel safe, then it starts to come out. Well, if you feel safe in your marriage, all of a sudden these things come out. So I think I look back and it's just amazing to see if you've got two people who are willing to grow and be open-minded, what can happen. Of course, that's not our entire story. We weren't both willing at first. I always tell people, if you want to make a better marriage, make a better you. It usually starts with one.
Absolutely. The way I say that is you go first. If you keep waiting for the other person to change, you can wait forever.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's disempowering for sure, right? Just to sit there and stay stuck and feel stuck. And that's what I felt like in our marriage. I blamed Casey. He blamed me. We could just keep going on that cycle. But at some point, it takes someone to raise their hand and go, I'm not going to do this anymore. And for us, that was me. I was like, I'm not going to do it anymore.
Yeah. And then what was the very first action step you took?
I went to therapy by myself. And I told my therapist everything that Casey was doing wrong. And she listened to me patiently. And then she says to me, but he's not here, so we can work on you. Are you willing to do that? And I said, yeah, I am. She goes, I'm sure you've got some growth areas and some pain and some hurt. And so really, she's like, you basically are in a one-sided marriage because Casey refused to go to therapy with me. And she said, work on you, despite what he does. However your marriage ends up, Meygan, it's a message of empowerment. You actually have more control and influence over your spouse than you think you do. Like you can change your own behavior and change the way that you guys are going to show up and do life together.
And what was cool about that story was the fact that Meygan started to change and she showed up very differently in the relationship. And so while we had sparks fly when we were first married, I'm the avoider of issues because going back to childhood, I uncovered there was a lot of lies that were told to me. My mom's been married 6 times, and every time she divorced, it was a different story. No one ever checked in on me, so I didn't really know how to deal with all this. And then I'm seeing Meygan, and I'm showing up old self, and she's like a new version, healthier boundaries, doesn't let me talk to her like that. And honestly, it inspired me. I was like, well, I mean, clearly she's doing a lot better than I am. And that inspired me to start that journey.
Yeah, I love hearing this. And actually, I did a podcast episode on this. I can link below. It's called When Your Partner Isn't Into Personal Growth. And in that, I tell a story about a man. He was bilingual, but his partner speak Spanish and I don't. So there was no possibility of them working with me together. You've presenced how childhood wounding and really there can be baggage from other adult relationships and different things, but primarily the biggest influences certainly come when we are children, which is something I want to highlight as I transition into a topic that I'm super excited to talk with the two of you about. When you're in a marriage and both of you are personally committed to growing, and so you work through the childhood wounding as it shows up in the dynamic in order to experience more pleasure and harmony with one another. Then we bring in the in-laws who have no reason to have gone through that growth in the same way. They are still in the dynamics that pre-existed the changes. So I am going to just leave it really open. I don't have a specific question. The two of you think in such a beautiful, systematic way and teach so clearly. So lay out the landscape, both how you have encountered it and any guidelines for someone listening who's just so frustrated that their mother-in-law is coming to visit next week or whatever the case may be.
There's a lot of things that are different about Meygan and I's childhood. And then there's a lot of things that are similar. You know, we both of our parents had affairs. There's some mental illness mixed into there. There's some just toxic behavior. One of my favorite stories that I have to share is, and again, this is my norm. I'm dating Meygan. I just think it's normal. I have her visit my mom, and she's married to her fourth husband, and he has two kids from a previous marriage. And we all sit down at the dinner table, and the third husband, a previous father to me, who I hadn't seen in like 10 years, shows up at the door and drops off the kid that they had together. And the fourth husband's like, hey, come on in, come on, sit down with us. He comes down, has dinner with us, with Meygan next to me. So I'm from my mom's first. There's her third husband, the kid that they had together, her fourth husband, and the two kids he's had from a previous marriage. And Meygan's looking at me like, this is not normal. So I think for me, a lot of dysfunction we see with the couples that we meet stems from a lot of this, like they haven't stopped and really like analyzed, like, is this bad behavior? They just kind of assume, well, they're mom and dad and they're healthy. And that's just not true. And I think that's why Meygan went to therapy. She was able to recognize what's good and what's bad.
Yeah, we quickly realized that what we thought was normal wasn't actually normal. And I think that's what people find themselves, right? You only know what you know, but then you grow up and you get a chance to go, oh, this didn't feel right growing up. I don't want to repeat that mistake. And so I feel like people kind of follow two paths. Either they go exactly where the mom and dad went, or they go, I want to be the complete opposite of what my mom and dad did, right? And I think for Casey, he just followed in their footsteps. And for me, I grew up knowing I don't want this. So on a practical note, because I know that that's what your listeners are wanting, and that's really what we teach. One of the things that Casey and I would share with any couple is you need to actually sit down with your spouse and make a list of who we can share personal information with. And what are the topics that are off limits to share with family members? And what are the topics that are okay? Especially like around the holidays, people start drinking, they tend to overshare. And what we always tell couples is, typically, family members pick sides and they judge. And it's really hard for them to see both perspectives. Now, like you said, Alexandra, there's exceptions to those rules, absolutely. But for the most part, the couples that we work with, they have in-law and family issues. So come up with that list.
I'm so happy to be discussing this with you. I love it. And what guidelines do you give about when to revisit it? Not that anyone else is, making that extreme a change.
The guidelines we use is that if it's working and you're happily married and you set that list, don't change it because it's working. If someone has doubts or things change or someone wants to bring it up at any point, they can say, hey, can we revisit that list? And can we just talk about this again? So I'm going to give an example. One topic that both Casey and I agreed to many, many years ago, it's never changed and we've never revisited it. Doesn't mean we won't, is we don't talk about our finances with our parents. Hands down. And you know why that's a rule? Because we used to do that. And then it was thrown back in our face with one of our family members about our finances and what we spend our money on. And they just don't agree with how we spend and save our money. And it was really hurtful. And so the new rule 10 years ago was we are not going to talk about our finances. It's none of their business.
Okay, great example, so clear. What about the situations where there is not actually agreement?
If couples are having frequent conversations about boundaries, especially when it comes to parenting, and they're on the same page and they find alignment, you typically won't find too much of a disagreement around that because they're talking and they're keeping those open lines of communication. It's when couples find hot topics that they kind of close off to each other because there's been conflict and it has not been resolved, that then it becomes kind of like your side and my side, right? And I don't want to talk about it because last time I talked about it, you attacked me on this or that. So that right there is extremely important. I just wanted to address something too, because what we've seen a lot happening with couples is if you have an avoidant spouse that's not willing to talk to their parents about those hard conversations, and the other spouse wants to, it's crossing interference lines when the wife is talking to the husband's parents about boundaries. And we always say, like, your parents, it's your call. Like, if this is your parents, you need to set the boundary to make sure that your spouse isn't having to cross over because it's not their mom and dad, it's not their family. And I think, again, you're kind of butting up against, like, the conversation is not necessarily even about parenting, but it could be about values.
Yes.
And those are like really,
and respect.
Right.
Or embarrassment, like we can't get our 7-year-olds act together. And one spouse is like, hey, but I need help and this is a good thing. And the other person's like, but I'm embarrassed because it'll look like I'm not a great mom or I'm not a great dad, right?
The values thing goes back to what you were talking about. I mean, when it comes to even money fights are not necessarily about money, but about what money represents to each other. And so there's kind of like these meta themes happening that, again, if couples aren't having open conversations, then we're not unearthing like what the true fight is about. It's funny that I was just flipping through our new book coming out in December is 365 Connecting Questions for Couples.
Hold it up longer for anyone who's watching on YouTube. You'll be able to see it clearly. Hey. And if you're just listening, it's 365 Connecting Questions for Couples.
Yep.
With 200 new questions.
Is there anything that makes you feel uncomfortable about my parents and family? Why or why not? So a great conversation. You can blame Casey and Meygan that they asked the real tough question, but these are the types of lines of communication. If you are talking about, I really don't like when your mom comes over and then she's trying to tell me how to parent our children. Like, this is our family, right? So if you ask that question, though, your partner's going to say, what's the question behind that question? Or what's prompting you? So this book is great to keep lines of conversation going about boundaries.
With a couple that is experienced and trusts the connection, the foundation of the connection when navigating complicated topics, then that question is magnificent. But I don't think of it as a starter question if there are complications going on. So take us through where you would start a couple such that they would be prepped to actually dive into that content in the way that you've shared.
I would always start with, they both actually have the same goal. And the same goal is that we're thriving and we're happily married. We got to remind ourselves the basics of being married and doing life with somebody. So, hey, we're gonna talk about this topic. I know that there's been some hurt moments, and I know that we've had some drama with family, but let's just remind ourselves, like, you and I, we love each other and we're actually on the same team and we want the same things. We might have 2 different ways to get there, but let's not forget that in this conversation. So I would say start with something very positive like that, very team mindset. One thing that I would recommend, get curious, and I would really listen to your spouse. Can you share more with me? Tell me why you want to share this with your parents. Like, I want to understand where you're coming from. that will hopefully give you more perspective, that you will be able to see things through their eyes. Hopefully your spouse will do that to you too. Okay, so tell me why you don't want to tell my parents, or tell me why you don't want to share this.
What I recommend, if one person asks those questions and then they're waiting and the questions don't come, just go ahead and answer them anyway, as though they've been asked, so that you're both sharing until your partner gets the hang of it.
Yes, absolutely. They model that behavior, right? And the thing I would always say when it comes to specifically with in-laws is perspective taking. And then the next step would be really understanding that when someone doesn't feel comfortable, you need to pay attention. So if Casey wants to share something with his dad and I feel uncomfortable, it's my job to speak up and say, hey, I feel uncomfortable and here's why. And then if he's like, babe, it's my dad, or, it's just family and he loves us, all the platitudes, all the minimizing of the feelings, whatever happens, right? You say, hey, listen, what if you felt really uncomfortable if I shared something with my dad? And you were like, babe, I don't want you to tell your dad that. And I knew that you felt uncomfortable, but I did it anyway. How would that make you feel? I'll tell you, it stops about 95% of the argument. Because it's that, again, it's perspective taking. It's saying, I want you to put yourself in my shoes. Right now, I feel uncomfortable. Then the next practical application of this would be, this isn't a forever. This could just be right now. We don't have to make a decision to call your parents right now about our child. Can we just sleep on this? Can we think about this? Can we talk about this next week? And then I want to think about this more. That's always an easy out, by the way, if you need, so Casey's a verbal processor. I'm more of an internal processor. I need that time to I'm a pros and cons list maker. I journal, I pray, I take a walk, I think out loud. I'm in the car, I listen to classical music. I'm that boring person, but I'm thinking through these things. So I need time. It's a great way just to cool things off, keep things calm and healthy, but to give yourself space to really think about it and how to move forward together as a team.
I love that you've shared that. And I think it's important for a couple that tends to fight a lot, or when having difficult conversations falls into fighting, to train themselves to stop while it feels good, rather than to keep going until it doesn't, which I feel like you've given a really beautiful tool for doing that, with the understanding that you come back and finish the conversation another time. It's not that it's then over. And that's a key part that sometimes slips and really shouldn't.
Our rule is, if you are the one asking for space or more time or a break, then the rule is you are the one to then initiate it. And depending upon the topic and the situation, something like an in-law conversation that's not necessarily pressing right now at the moment, I would say no more than 7 days. But obviously a fight between a husband and a wife, we're talking no more than 24 hours. Sometimes you just need a good night's sleep, honestly. And that's Casey and I, we used to fight till 2 a.m. in the morning. It's not good. It's not productive. It would cause more damage than good, until we realized, wait, hold on. We're just really tired. It's 2 a.m. in the morning. We need sleep. And then we will talk about it tomorrow. This isn't us giving up or avoiding. This is us being smart.
Yes. And I immediately have come to mind a couple I coached where they were both so busy, and she was more of a morning person and he was more of a night person, but still they were both tired at the end of the day. And so just when she was ready to go to sleep would be whenever he would start bringing things up. So I also think that it's really important, if you're in a dynamic that's anything like what we're talking about now, is actually to schedule those conversations and to set a timer. Because if you're not used to stopping while things are going well, plan to talk for 20 minutes and the timer goes off, and then you decide, well, should we do another 20 minutes or should we take a break now? Which is slightly different than what you're saying, where one partner identifies, I need a break, and then says so. But it also takes some practice to recognize that, rather than recognizing it in the rearview mirror. So one way to mitigate that is just to set a timer.
Yeah, I love that.
What else really belongs in a conversation about navigating in-laws, and just what arises because two people have always come from different experiences, whether that it's dramatic, or even if you grow up on the same street, you didn't grow up in the same family?
Well, I think it's really important when we're setting boundaries, especially in marriage, Never to make demands of each other. Like, you're not going to do this, or you're going to do, to really make requests, I think is really important. I'm hoping that we're talking to a couple that's being respectful of each other, right? That there's trust with each other. And then I think the other thing is to never prevent your spouse to have a relationship with their parents. But then if you feel like things are moving into an unhealthy place, is to be able to say, you go visit with them. It doesn't mean that I have to come every single time. It doesn't mean that the kids have to come every time, because I want to make sure you have a relationship with your parents. Now, piggybacking to what we said earlier, but we also want to make sure these are things that we don't want to share with our parents, because they're always going to take their child's side. So as soon as you start complaining about your spouse to your parents, they're going to take your side. They're not going to rush in and say, well, what do you think about her perspective? No.
Another little trick, by the way, that's really helped Casey and I is to have a code word or a signal that is prepared ahead of time, not on the drive on the way to the mother-in-law's house or the sister's house. Like, talk about it a couple days before. And this has really helped, because if you do feel uncomfortable, you're going in knowing that, okay, I feel a little bit anxious, babe. I'm with your family. They make me feel anxious. Then we have this code word that we use. Another thing that we do is, if our kids aren't with us, we always use our kids. We tell our kids, blame mom and dad, right? If you're in a very unhealthy or anxious situation and you're embarrassed in front of your peers, say, my mom's making me come home. You don't have to explain anything more, and blame us. We do the same thing to our kids. We blame our kids if we're in an uncomfortable situation. It's a family thing. We all four our unit, and we've all got each other's back. And so there have been times we've got two teenagers where we've been at family situations. One of us feels very uncomfortable, and we just go to each other and we go, oh, hey, babe, our daughter, Kylie's on the phone. She just needs to talk to us about something really important. And then it removes us from that conversation. Oh, excuse me. We powwow and we go, how you doing? You good? We still good? We check in with each other, right? When things are still good, like you said, Alexandra, I love it. Not when mother-in-law just cussed me out. It hasn't happened yet. So let's check in. Okay, we're good. Okay, hey, I want to only stay for about another 30 minutes. Are you good with that? Oh, well, you know what? Can we do an hour? Okay, yes. And you remain flexible, but have a code word or a code phrase or a plan like that. That gives anyone who's feeling very anxious that ease to be able to say, I've got a backup plan just in case.
But it goes to a mindset as well, that you are a team with your spouse before you're a team with your parents. Like, it is about you and your partner. And I do think that's really important. I mean, it's like in the Bible, like leave and cleave. Like, you leave your family of origin and you move into, you're creating a new family. And I wish I would see a more healthier mindset with a lot of couples that we work with, to recognize, like, my spouse is actually my number one priority.
The thing that's totally clear is that your highest value is the marriage. It's one another, but it's the marriage. That everything that both of you have said in terms of having things work, it's with the marital relationship being the priority. And take some time to shift to having identities and like inner worlds that align with having the marriage be the primary rather than the parental relationships.
And I would say it has a lot to do with how we date people. So I think the way we date is, speaking from our own experience, it was like, this is pretty fun. Let's do this for the rest of our lives. It wasn't like we're a team now. So I totally do agree that it takes time to form that. But if we have the right mindset going into dating, like, I'm finding someone and I actually want to make sure, is this the person that I want to do the next 50 years of my life with, versus what I'm hearing from. So I officiate weddings. I've done over 1,000 weddings in the past 10 years. And I get to hear all the love stories of how couples meet and fall in love. And I will tell you, the majority of stories I'm hearing are sometimes just slipping into like a convenience / like just ease into it. Like you were talking about, easy. We're just, we're not going to ask the tough questions. We like the same thing, so let's do life together, versus really digging in and asking hard questions to recognize, like, for example, and understanding red flags and what we call red flags and green flags. Like, is this person open to continuing to learn about themselves? And, I think that we see that might have been presented when we're dating, but by the time they're married, they become closed-minded. Like, hey, let's check out this tool. Or let's listen to this podcast together. Nah, I'm good. So it's really about setting up the conversation well when we're dating that will help us form a team stronger for the long run.
And because the vast majority of people I'm interacting with and listeners are well past dating, I think what you've just said is aspirational and really relevant to tell your children. And if that's not how you did it, everything that contributes to having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill, including how to navigate these things. As long as both of you want to start having those conversations, it's never too late.
That's what I was going to follow up with to say. So we've been married 21 years, and the first 9 years of our marriage, our in-law issues were horrible. Horrible with a capital H. They were beyond toxic, more toxic than I think we realized they were. It wasn't until there was a massive blow up with Casey's side of the family with something that happened. And I think Casey has never seen me. I'm not a big crier. I was in the fetal position crying. And it was when he had to realize, like, oh crap, I've allowed my family to really hurt my wife. And this is the mother of my kids. And that moment was a shift for our marriage. I mean, we really, instead of it allowing us to break apart and fight, which we had been that couple that didn't see eye to eye on in-laws and family all for 9 years. Okay. So that's why I'm like, we're the people to talk to because we did that. At some point, you have to realize that it's better to just be a team. And so we spent months healing and apologizing to one another for the lack of boundaries and the demands we both made. And we were like, this is a season where we need to fix us, Casey and Meygan, and not worry about anybody else in our family. And that's actually when we started a new thing where on Christmas Day, we don't go and hang out with any family. And imagine there's 12 marriages between our parents. That'd be a lot of different family. It was so chaotic and stressful, Alexandra, that there was no energy for sex. There was no energy for us having our time together as a couple or even for our children. And so all these boundaries started to be put into place. And now we're seeing 11 years later, and we get to experience the fruit. And so, yes, if you're dating and you're listening, pay attention to what Casey said. But if you're married and you're like, well, wait, we didn't ask those hard questions. We didn't either. We started to. And I would say it's never too late. It's never too late to ask questions. It's never too late to create a boundary. It's never too late to heal and forgive, and that there is hope.
And there is little in life that is more extraordinary and satisfying in terms of relationships than taking a marriage where there's a lot of hurt and turning it into what the two of you embody and exemplify.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. So, anything else you want to say about your book or your programs, how people can find you, what they would find you for?
Yeah, I want to say something about the book because I love my own book. I don't know if I can say that any more clearly because when Meygan and I were hurting, I didn't know how to have the conversations. So speaking to those couples are looking for connection inside their relationship, but feel like they can't get there. I still wanted to talk to Meygan. I still wanted to connect. And I would say most couples want that. They just don't know how to get there. And when Meygan and I looked at her and I said, I would love to have great conversations with you. I just don't know what to ask. I don't know how to ask it. And Megan's like, on it. And she's like, she's question queen. She wrote probably 90% of this book. And the idea was just giving us, we spent some time being intentional in this one moment to create these questions. But then, 2 weeks later on a date night, after we've worked all day long, it's hard to come up with that. It's hard to be inspired by that. So to have like a tool that gets the conversation going was so helpful. It was unbelievable that we could actually fill a whole night with us talking and conversing by having a couple questions to prompt that and to kind of spark that imagination and the recall and sharing our hopes and dreams and preferences and things like that.
Another thing to say about the book is that there is a section in there where we give like, tips on like kind of like limit distractions, how to make the most of it. And one of the questions we get asked often is, what do you do when you ask a question and your spouse always says, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. That gets really old. It gets boring. It kind of just cuts the lines of communication down. And it happens. And I always tell people it often happens with people who don't want to look stupid. They've shared in the past. They've been ridiculed for it. They themselves feel insecure. So they don't, they for whatever reason, or they lack self-awareness. They actually really don't know the answer because they've never taken the time to think about it. And so I always say, that's okay that you don't know. Why don't you think about it and ask and come back to me if you think of something in the next couple of days. This is supposed to be a win for your marriage, this book. So it's not supposed to be this regimented, do it every day, open it up. I mean, there's a lot of couples who do that and they find a lot of growth in that. But, you can go to our website, marriage365books.com and get a copy. But it's a great gift to give couples for their anniversary. Your son and his future bride might need one. It's really great. It's not just for married couples. It's for dating and engaged couples as well.
Okay, fantastic. And anything else that you want to share other than this magnificent book, 365?
Come follow us on social media, Instagram, Marriage365. It's a great community. We love hearing how people are working on their relationship, working on themselves. Some of them are doing it as couples, some of them are doing it as individuals. But the common thread is that people are becoming hungry to learn.
Wonderful. And I am so grateful that the two of you provide a feast. It's a buffet for all the hungry people. You can try a little bit of everything. You can start with dessert, whatever you want. You really do offer a lot. And so I thank you both for sharing so generously and collaboratively, letting people have an experience.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome.